gentlemen, welcome back to another episode of Tubby Talk, the show where we talk about video games in the lovely Tubby robot here in Manayunk. I am Terry from Terry Leahy Films with the new Terry Leahy Films official hoodie.
Ooh.
It's a Superman style hoodie because I feel like a Superman when I film with you guys. And your names are?
I am Chris McGuire of the Tubby Robot Ice Cream Factory.
And I'm Steve Wright Jr. of the Tubby Robot Ice Cream Factory. Since we're doing buzz marketing.
Yeah.
Buzz by. Yeah, from here on in, we're going to wear wacky outfits that are competing with each other.
Flash mob!
So today, the boys decided they wanted to talk about retro gaming. And I was like, well, how do you even play retro gaming? And they were like, well, that'll be the subject of today's talk. So we're going to talk about how to play some of those awesome retro games. I know a couple, but these guys definitely know a lot more than I do. But I do know one way is to come down here and play them here at Tubby Robot Ice Cream Factory in what they call the Wallovision.
TM.
Image.
That's legal. That's legal.
Yeah.
He just did a legal thing.
So I'm gonna let you guys kind of start us off and tell us a little bit about how does one play retro games?
Yeah. Sure. So the first, the way with the highest fidelity, I want to say, is to build a time machine and go back in time.
Yeah, that's the best way because then you get to use these same old stupid TVs we had and make it look just as horrible as when we were young.
Yeah, but it didn't seem as horrible because we weren't used to. I guess the problem is you're used to things now. So with the time machine, you go back and then you can't see anything on GoldenEye's screen because it's just a muddy polygonal mess.
Can I be that guy? What does the word fidelity mean?
Fidelity is truth, I believe, or like truth in image.
Yeah,
Truth in image.
that would be the entomology at least. Yeah,
Yeah,
so
yeah.
the trying to look for what the game...
Entomology is the science of words, right?
Yes.
Okay, yeah.
Etymology. Entomology is the study of insects.
yeah.
Damn it. I've been thinking about Spider-Man.
But yeah, I guess that's a really good way to put it because when you talk about retro games, what is truth, right? Mm-hmm. Is it the way that the developers intended? Is it the way that it was presented to us as children?
Yeah. Or even is it the way that they wish they could have presented it, but they were limited by technology at the time?
Right, and there's a lot of fights about this, about what is truth, what is best when it comes to retro games. So a lot of the things we'll talk about now are very contentious amongst like a couple thousand really angry people.
Yes.
Yeah.
So are you kind of talking about like, oh, if you're going to play a Nintendo game, you have to play it on the Nintendo or it doesn't count? Those types of folks?
Yes.
Yes.
Got it.
and also the types of things where you have like games, 8-bit or 16-bit games, where they have interlacing as visual options for a lot of re-release games now to add the lines like you had on a CRT.
Yeah, to emulate the scan lines of a
scan
cathode
lines.
ray television.
Good God.
Which makes it look like it did back in the day.
Yeah.
Which might not be better for today's sensibilities or for what you want to see.
I'll tell you what, there was an added challenge for if you had a TV that had those rounded corners because your sprites would warp a little bit
Yes.
on certain, if you had a tube TV with like the line that's just permanently in the middle and you're playing Mega Man and he just kind of walks out right in the middle as he's going by. I remember those days.
Yeah. They were the worst. And then there's also is it smoothing it's called?
Yeah.
The effects they do
Video
sometimes.
term.
Yeah, where they take the pixels and just smooth the edges, AKA make it blurry as hell.
Yeah. But that was kind of part of the charm. They took these blocky images that were really in the computer, jagged saw blades, and by putting them through the CRT, they'd come out looking rounder and fuzzier and kind of softer. And maybe you saw some life in there that perhaps was not necessarily intended, but it made them seem like this, for lack of a better term, alive.
So you're saying that there is a war between people who say, it seems like the same thing of like comic books, you have to read the paper comic book versus a digital comic book, or it doesn't count, those types of folks.
Same deal.
Yes.
So where do you guys fall in that argument?
So what I will say is
I'm digital or die. Just you get mad at me before you come down on them.
I just played Castlevania Rondo of Blood.
Okay.
The original version, it was ported to PS4 recently. So played it there for the first time. And they had interlacing options, which made it look like a CRT monitor, which I did not like because I didn't like scan lines as a kid. They were just part of what I had to see. And then you could add smoothing. And the smoothing made it look very blurry.
Yeah.
Okay.
As if, like, bleary, I want to say. Like, so with the interlacing and smoothing, it may have looked like a CRT monitor, as Chris was saying, like a true to life. But I don't have to do that anymore. I have a 55-inch 1080p TV. So I want to watch stuff and play stuff in 1080p.
You want to see those saw blades.
Yeah, and either I get jagged saw blades or I get a mushy mess that look like Vaseline's rubbed all over the screen, which looks gross in that game. I like to play it without any interlacing or smoothing, just with the raw pixels. And then I interpret it with my eyes and my brain, as I've been doing my whole life.
So you like the digital presentation, taking these old games and making them look perhaps as they were intended, perhaps as the developers saw them as they made them.
Yeah, as the computer's outputting it onto the screen without any smoothing and without any interlacing from the screen.
I would argue at the time, though, those artists could not imagine what it was going to look like because the technology didn't exist yet.
Well,
right?
the thing, when they were making the graphics, they were zoomed in like crazy. So they were actually had to manually put in bit by bit on a matrix what the dots were. So
If you're curious why Chris knows about bit by bit, look behind me. He designed these bit by bit.
yeah. So it's hard to. I mean, they definitely know what they put in to make it happen, and they blew the graphics up. But yeah, they were still running the development probably on a CRT in the end, at least when you're talking about the NES era. And for in terms of preference, for me, I'm kind of a fence sitter. I love them both. There's some games I want to play that way with the nice sharp pixels and like, oh, that's better than how I remember. And then there's some games I have a CRT in my basement. I have a, what is it? It's like a 32-inch CRT.
Sony, the good Sony CRTs they made in like the late 90s.
One of the last ones. Yeah, it's huge. It's heavy. I carried it myself.
They have digital inputs. Yours is S-video input in it, right?
It's this video, yeah.
Yeah.
So I love to play a lot of my classic games on that, on the original systems, with the original cartridges, with the original controller, and sit there and just be like, I couldn't afford this when I was a kid. A lot of it's nostalgia. That's absolutely true. And anything else I say would be just a justification, because it is absolutely nostalgia. On the other hand, though, I really do like seeing those sharp pixels sometimes, too. Like Steve was saying, I bought this NES. This is one of the ways we'll talk about, but Nintendo's not making the NES anymore. Yeah. At least not as we know it. There's this company called Analog that was making a replica NES.
That's a good name.
Yeah.
Good for them.
And basically what it is, it's an NES that they mimicked every circuit in. They used what's called a programmable, an FPGA. It's a programmable microchip that basically makes it physically act like an NES. And they have a cartridge slot. Yeah. So it emulates, it doesn't emulate, it is the system.
They reverse engineered an NES.
Right.
Wow.
But without reverse engineering it, so Nintendo doesn't sue them to high heaven.
Right. So it's got 100% compatibility with every cartridge ever made, Famicom or NES. It's got 4 controller ports. Yeah, and it's got controller ports for the original NES. So you plug all your old stuff in and it works. And most importantly, it outputs to HDMI, which the NES never did. Never knew that thing was going to be a thing. So now on my big main gaming TV, I have that. And I can play my NES's cartridges nice. And I switch back and forth sometimes, like, I really want to see the pixels in this game. And sometimes I'm like, put on that CRT filter. Oh yeah, check it out. Battletoads, I love playing with the CRT filter. It's
nice.
Good. Scan lines, that's how I remember it.
It's easier with the scan lines.
Yeah,
Battletoads is a hard game, so you need the scan lines to make it slightly easier.
You need every edge you can get in Battletoads.
Yeah, that's true.
Literally in this case.
Yeah.
That's true.
But this thing was...
That's funny.
But this thing, it was expensive. I believe when it came out, it was $400 or $500. I got it as a very nice Christmas present. I've been playing it a bunch since then, and I love it. But it's definitely sort of connoisseur, hoity-toity sort of way to get into it.
Okay.
Not only do you need to buy this expensive piece, but you have to buy the cartridges.
Which you've owned a lot of them for a while.
Yeah,
right?
and I've been hoarding them. Like when I was a kid, I was like, my whole collection was like, I got 10 Nintendo games. I got 10 Nintendo games. Yeah. But now you can actually go hunting and find more. Sometimes for cheap, sometimes for more than you would ever want to pay. But I've been kind of slowly becoming a collector of the old stuff, trying to.
So where does the argument fall on hacking an original system? Like, are people still saying that's original? Because, like, Angry Video Game Nerd has the Nintoaster.
Yeah.
that's a toaster that plays Nintendo games. I remember having like an N64 that was hacked, and you could play NES games, a Dreamcast that could play Super Nintendo games with original controllers and things like that. Where do people fall on that? Is that cool in that world, or is that sacrilegious?
Yeah, it depends, but like most of those are aesthetic, right?
Yeah, a lot of them are aesthetic based, or kind of like from the more like technical angle. What can I get to run on this type of angle? Like with for instance the SNES emulators on Dreamcast. I think it was SNES
9X, I think.
SNES 9X, yeah, on the Dreamcast, and you burned it to a disc, a CD-ROM, and you put it into the Dreamcast, and you didn't have to do much hacking to the Dreamcast itself, and then it would load it up and load up the menu, and you just play it.
That's the first. I guess the Sony PlayStation was the first one I remember where people were just putting in like gold or blue colored discs, but they were games.
Yeah.
Yeah,
But they were not supposed to be games.
Yeah, the PlayStation 2, you had to do a lot of stuff too. There was a whole pencil eraser trick.
Yeah,
Look it up on the internet.
Physical mods. Yeah, now we're getting into the legally ambiguous or straight outright illegal part of playing old games.
Okay.
And the thing
Talk about it.
Yeah.
yeah, the thing about the Dreamcast was you needed, if I remember correctly, you needed a bootloader either on a separate disc or at the beginning of the disc you burned.
Yeah.
Which is a segment on this on the disc that the Dreamcast would read and say, okay, this is official Dreamcast software. Then it would play whatever was on it. So that's how you got the SNES 9X emulator and ROMs to play on it. You could also play burned Dreamcast games, which I did not do. A friend of mine did when I was younger. Played lots of games. I ended up buying a lot of those same games because my friend enjoyed playing them so much that I decided I should buy them and support
Game makers.
the game maker, or the used game store at that point. But
Yeah, so we were getting into the realm of emulators, right? So
Yeah.
Emulators are software-based, for lack of a better term, emulators. They make it so that they mimic the hardware of a system in software. Yeah. And there are pros and cons to those. One of the biggest pros is that if you steal them, the ROMs that power them, it's free. And you can play them on pretty much any computer or pretty much anything that's shaped like a computer. The downside is it's illegal to take ROMs, intellectual property, and not pay for them.
Unless you own them. Wasn't it okay?
Also a gray area?
yeah, I believe it was okay for you to make a backup of your cartridge-based game, not to own a backup of it. Yeah, which, 99.9% of people were not doing.
Of course.
And also the other problem with emulation, which you're probably about to get to, is that they're not one-to-one emulation because you can't do perfect hardware emulation through software, at least not cheaply, as far as overhead goes.
Right. There are some, especially like NES emulators that get close now, but they do it with a very CPU-intensive process. So you need a fast machine to emulate this tiny little old Super Nintendo with this dinky little processor. You need like a crazy modern system to try to emulate it perfectly. Now you can get by with just, normal haphazard animation with ZSNES or SNES 9X, which are these programs you have probably used.
Yeah.
And for most games, it's fine, but that's why you'll find the odd game where it does not work.
Certainly ZSNES was on my PC. Now, I went to Mac many years ago, but still, I remember the joy of ZSNES on PC when I was like in college and in high school, playing these classic games that I just didn't have access to and whatnot. And first time I played Chrono Trigger, that was how.
Yeah.
Until it was one of those ROMs that didn't work all the way. And I could only play Chrono Trigger up until a certain point because Chrono Trigger was one of those advanced cartridges, I believe, that had something that they just weren't able to duplicate on the SNES. So it played up until right after you got Robo, and then and you couldn't go any further. You got stuck in this permanent maze that was in the whatever it is, 9999 AD or wherever Robo lives, 20,000 AD maybe.
Yeah. It was like 20,000, 30, something like that. 2030? I don't know.
So who knows? But yeah, that was my exposure. But I also got to play just a lot of games I didn't have because I think emulation is great for us now. Do it the legal way, which we'll get to in a minute. Because it just gave us exposure to games that we just didn't have access to before, I
remember playing on ZSNES, I played Super Mario RPG. First, the only time I played it was on that, and it was great.
Yeah. And RPGs are really well suited to emulation because They don't require the twitch timing so much. You don't care if it's not perfectly emulated because the timing doesn't matter. It's turn-based.
As long as it doesn't cut off after you save real quick.
Yeah. But I would always test out a new machine by turning up an emulator and turning on Super Mario World and to see where the input lag was at and how many frames were skipped, and that's the sort of stuff where you can tell where it's different than the real hardware when you play Mario World. Like you jump in and you're trying to like speed run with Yoshi, and if you can't do it right, you're like, well, it's not me, it's that.
See, you guys were more advanced players than I was. Like, so from like speed running, all that stuff, that's where it's breaking down and stuff. Because I remember it being pretty accurate on my end.
Yeah, I mean, it looks great. It's really until you get really sensitive to changes that you can tell a difference.
Yeah, and you know, at the time, I remember you could plug the original Xbox controller in, and ZSNES had a mod where you could use it as the main controller, and it was a lot of fun. But the controls were still off. Anything else on illegal methods?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot you can go into there.
As I was, I just had to research because I couldn't remember the name for Capcom arcade games, namely fighting games, and also Neo Geo games. There was one called Final Burn Alpha that was supposed to be like the pinnacle of arcade emulation, arcade perfect emulation. From what I understand, I've read something about it last week, so I might be a little bit misremembering. But there was that, and the one me and Chris both used called WinCoax, which was a Windows version of like DOS program to do this. But it ran
hacks on hacks.
Yeah, hacks on hacks on hacks. But it ran just about every game. I think there was a Mac version as well. There was like a Mac Coax.
Yeah, it was like all like Capcom games and Neo Geo games.
Yeah. So I played Metal Slug X, I think it was, all the time because that was when it was brand new, and I was like, brand new arcade game on my computer. Yes. Sorry for not paying for this, but I put so many quarters into Metal Slug 2. They can understand.
Yeah, but you know what? It was never as. Did you notice that it wasn't as fun to play an arcade-style game like emulated on your computer because
by yourself generally.
Well, because you could just keep hitting the credit button and keep going, so there was no like.
If you don't use the honor system, you can just hit the credit button.
But
are you talking about the honor system with an emulator?
So with the Analog Mini, so you put cartridges into it, but it also has an SD card slot. And if you happen to download every NES ROM ever and put it on the SD card and happen to, rewrite the BIOS so it can run them, you can run any NES game for free, factory perfect.
Allegedly.
Allegedly, I've heard. So it's one way to make that price sort of justify itself if you want arcade hardware perfect performance from something you did not pay for.
Good God.
Yes. Also good to know is they've released a Super NT, which plays Super Nintendo games and Super Famicom games, and that is $160, much cheaper, because they made this one out of plastic. The other one was made out of like machined metal, aluminum, and this one's plastic to be cheaper. Has the same SD card slot.
Yeah. And then, I'm not sure about SD card slot, but I know Terry will be very enthused to hear this.
Okay.
Also making a Mega NT, which is Sega Genesis Mega Drive emulator. So it will play the Master System games and Genesis games, and it's also set up to connect to a Sega CD.
What?
So if you have a Sega CD, or you can find one, you can attach the Mega NT to it with the same port, sit it on top, and you can play Sega CD games. The 32X does not work the same way because you have to plug in cords to it. Yeah. So they said they may release a revision or a breakout box to enable that in the future.
Oh my God.
I still have a copy of Jurassic Park on Genesis, which was the superior version. I think I've talked about this before. Yeah. So I'm interested in getting one of those and plopping that in and dying over and over again because it was very hard.
Wasn't there some computer, I think it was like named after a fruit or something?
The retro
Strawberry?
Yeah, the Raspberry Pi.
Raspberry Pi. What's that?
So the Raspberry Pi is a tiny system on a chip. It's a whole computer that lives on a tiny card, basically. It costs $35, and you can run. We run it in the shop here actually for our window boards. It runs Linux for us. Yeah, you can run an operating system on them and use it like a computer. You can also set it up to play retro games on an emulator. So a lot of people will just plug them in their TV with it. It's got an HDMI port. It's got USB ports. You can plug in any controller and just play any game. I would say you really don't want anything in the 3D realm on those. They're not quite fast enough to handle it. Like a lot of people do N64 games on them. I wouldn't. But if you're talking NES, Super NES, Genesis, Neo Geo, like they all run very well on those for $35.
How about like Game Boy Advance, DS?
Yeah, all that. Absolutely.
DS?
DS, I'm pretty sure, yeah.
Yeah, I remember because I had a DS emulator for my computer, like 15 years ago now. So it definitely works.
Yeah.
Was it 15? It was many years ago, but it definitely worked because that's how I played my first Fire Emblem game because most of them weren't released over here. So I played one of the Japanese versions.
It was a great way to play
It was really
imports.
good, yeah.
and a lot of times people would do fan translations so that you could even read them in the language that you read. So that's another way, like a really cheap hardware way. Of course, we already talked computers. If you already own one, you can emulate. You can get a Raspberry Pi for $35 and play it on anything you want. If you want a dedicated box, that's cool.
There's definitely Mac emulators.
Tons of Mac emulators, yeah.
And in case you weren't familiar, you can definitely find versions of the same ones now.
Yeah.
It's funny, I think I'm okay with emulators and have been since the Virtual Console came out on the Wii. I think that was, for me, the first legal experience to go back that I was willing to put money into and to pay for because it was kind of priced right. Like, there were some NES games that came out for $1. You know, and then 5, 6, 7, and you know, certainly I got Chrono Trigger again. I got Super Mario RPG again. But the great thing about that way of playing retro games is that the Wii controller was kind of built for retro games as well.
Yeah.
Especially with the extra port to give the
classic controller.
That was super helpful when you were trying to play Super Nintendo games, and I believe they emulated Sega games on that too,
They
didn't
put out
they?
some Sega games.
They put out Sega games, they put out Neo Geo games, they put out TurboGrafx 16 games.
Yeah, that's right. Knuckles Chaotix is definitely on there.
They put out a lot of really cool stuff. Actually, it's probably the best legal emulation you can find in terms of library, at least.
Rest in peace, Virtual Console.
Yeah. Well, what's cool is that the Wii, if you have one lying around, is also an excellent piracy machine.
Oh God.
It's one of the best, one of the cheapest. If you can soft mod it, if you have just a copy of Legend of Zelda Twilight Princess, that's all you need.
For what? For the Wii?
For the Wii, yeah.
Why that one?
Because there is a way that it accesses the memory that other games don't do, and when you get to a certain point, basically it's an injection site for code.
See, Nintendo, that's why you make original games for the right console instead of trying to upgrade something from GameCube. The pirates will get you.
Yeah. So if you happen to have a Wii stand sitting around, you can find tutorials online that'll help you soft mod your Wii, which lets you play Homebrew, which is the main thing. You install the Homebrew channel, and you can actually play really interesting original software. You can also get emulators for pretty much anything and play not only Virtual Console games, but also Wii games, straight up. Yeah. You can attach a hard drive to your Wii, fill it with ROMs of Wii games, and play them all.
Do you think that the video game industry is mad at how smart and how engineeringly tech savvy their clientele is?
I feel like Sega probably is, because there was a non-zero effect, a piracy effect on the sales of the Dreamcast, or the sales of Dreamcast software. Because Dreamcast sold pretty well, okay, but then everybody that bought one was like, why buy these games when I can just literally burn a copy from my friend's game, because it just took a computer.
And it came out right when CD burners got cheap enough for people to
it's cheap
own.
enough for the masses to own, and you just burn it and stick it right in the thing and play it.
Yeah.
So Sega should be mad about it because they went out the hardware business.
I mean, most of them have a very antagonistic role when it comes to emulators, especially Nintendo recently sent a cease and desist to the biggest ROM site on the web, and they had to take it down.
And then every other ROM site, like in the top 10, also took theirs down.
Well, I believe that's because Smash Bros, which is out by now, was in an insane way released 2.5 weeks early through pirated sites.
Yo, that happened afterwards.
Yeah, that happened afterwards. That was slightly different. From what I
Was
understand,
it vengeance? So you can't screw with pirates.
from what I understand, and maybe Chris can correct me on this, is because they released it for pre-download like a month ago, like a month before it released.
Yeah.
So I feel like you could take that pre-download information and rip it and use it to run. I don't know if that's what happened or if somebody got an early copy.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I didn't touch it yet because I don't want to be spoiled. But
I don't know how to. So.
I know they dislike it, and also one of the main reasons is that they want to make money off their own library, their past library.
Of course.
And a lot of people argue that they are doing a bad job of that. They have not released the games people want in a timely fashion at the price point people want. So a lot of people say, well, the only way to play it is to pirate it. A lot of people use the argument of preservation, which I think is fair because a lot of hardware dies. Like if you go back, PS1 games, a lot of them don't work anymore because bit rot. The CDs,
the CDs
were printed-
themselves.
they're just the plastic deteriorates.
I'm getting a tattoo that says bit rot right here.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
And like the poor Sega Saturn, not to keep beating up on Sega, but Panzer Dragoon Saga, the original developers lost the source code for the game, so they can't re-release it or port it because they would have to basically recreate the game from scratch.
And for those of you at home keeping score, that's the 6th time Panzer Dragoon source code removal has been brought up on this podcast.
But it's such a shame because it's such a beautiful game, especially for the time. Like the mix of storytelling and like gameplay was wonderful. And the only way to relive it is to buy a working Saturn and have a copy of this multi-$100
That is
game.
that is unbelievable.
And then because I don't even think you can't rip them on CD-ROMs and play them on Sega Saturn, I believe. So you would need an original Saturn original game. And they can't even make a new version of the original game to port it because they...
I mean, I don't think they're able to replicate the Saturn period. Like, no one's ever released a Saturn game on another system.
Yeah, but why would you?
There are a couple good ones.
Yeah, that's probably the only one they would want to.
I remember some firefighter game too that was a lot of fun.
Yeah.
Afterburn, probably?
No, it wasn't called that. But
Oh, Firefight. Yeah, it was an arcade game, too.
yeah, it was an arcade game.
I remember that.
There's like Brave Firefighters or something.
And
Yeah, it was similar to that Die Hard game that came out, the Die Hard trilogy game.
But like, yes, so speaking of Saturn games, there's some games that are not, this is another type of emulation we can get to a little bit later or right now, if there's time for it.
Yeah, go for it.
Which is another type of legal emulation, which is the backward compatibilities, systems built into certain consoles. Like the PS3 was built to play PS2 games.
Yeah.
And
The Wii was made to play GameCube games.
and
The DS could play Game Boy Advance
Game Boy
games.
Advance games. And then the 3DS could play DS games.
Yeah.
You know, and so there were legal ways to keep the original media, the cartridge or discs, usable into the future. And then there's another type that's more prevalent now with the PS4 and Xbox One, where they make like a port with an emulator built in to emulate that PS3 game on PS4.
The virtual console sort of
Virtual
method.
console, yeah, it works the same way. And Xbox has that backward compatibility program they're doing now.
Yeah, the Xbox One's really cool with it
Yeah.
because they ported a lot of 360 games that you would not be able to get otherwise.
Yeah.
Good.
So they're literally just making an emulator for Xbox 360 that runs on the Xbox One.
Yeah.
So you put in a 360 disc and it runs console perfect.
And Sony's the one that's tough about this, right? Like the PS3 couldn't play PS2,
Well,
and
the
PS2 couldn't play.
PS4 can't play PS3 games.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
That's silly.
And they released a streaming service, I think, to play PS3 games.
Yeah.
They bought a streaming service so they
Yeah.
could put PS3 games
They bought
on
a
it.
company called Gaikai that was all about, we will run the games on a server somewhere else, and we will stream the video to your TV, and your controller will stream the output to us, and then we'll go back and forth. Which is an interesting idea. The problem is that latency kills it, depending on your internet connection and where you live in the world.
Oh, obviously.
Right.
But like it was interesting. From what I understand, the recent re-release of Symphony of the Night and Rondo of Blood on PS4 are emulated versions because the Rondo of Blood is the original PC Engine version from the early 90s.
And I heard Symphony of the Night is the PSP re-release of Symphony of the Night, which is another place that completionists and like really anal people get mad because they re-released Symphony of the Night, one of the everyone's favorite Castlevania game.
Sure.
They released a version that changed a lot of
of it, yeah.
the text, and the text is what some people love about that game.
voice acting is totally different.
You can't change certain things.
Yeah. And
You can make a compliment.
Yeah. And I feel like part of it was they did not want to emulate the PS1 on the PS4, and they didn't have ability to port it, maybe? The Saturn version of Symphony of the Night was superior to a lot of people from what I read, because you could play as different characters you could not play. You could play as Maria Renard,
Oh, that's right.
who you can play in
The
Rondo
little
of
one.
Blood. Yeah, but you couldn't play as her in any other version,
Yeah.
and that's just lost to time because you can't port Saturn stuff.
I mean, the
around,
only
or
way
they
to have
won't.
everything is either to be rich and buy everything as it comes out, or steal things. There's really no gray area if you want everything.
So it's funny you just brought up backward compatibility because I was thinking of the Virtual Console, but I wasn't thinking of that specifically. But I realized my favorite way to play Zelda Ocarina of Time is on that 3DS. Mm-hmm. The remakes, I guess, would be a form of playing retro games if they don't change it too much.
Yeah.
Like changing that from 2D to 3D and enhancing the graphics, that is a wonderfully enhanced game. That is a great way to do it. And come on, as all of us are Switch owners, thanks to these guys, they got me a Switch. Playing full-size games in a handheld just feels great, and it's awesome. And they ported that game perfectly. Yeah. Well, they enhanced it. They didn't port it. They enhanced it. Although I've heard people are upset about the way they did this similar thing with Majora's Mask.
Yeah, although I love that port, and it's kind of the speedrunner sort of mentality versus the normal casual game player.
Oh, for casual people, the backflip thing.
Yes, for the casual people, it's like, oh, it looks better and the interface is better, and it's just a nicer
portable.
Game. It's nice to play overall, and it takes out some of the tricks that the old game had. So.
Yeah,
they fixed the bugs.
They fixed the bugs. Yeah, but I like the old Majora's Mask is sort of clunky to play, especially with the inventory management. On the 3DS, you can just go on the touchscreen, move things around. You have more buttons. It's nice.
Well, you turn into that fierce deity, and it only works half the time. Yeah. Other times it gets stuck in face-looking thing. It's very strange.
But yeah, ports are huge this generation, particularly. And a lot of that is you're mentioning, like you're mad at PlayStation 4 for not being backwards compatible. There's a really good technological reason for that in the Xbox One. They changed basically their entire architecture to x86 processors, which is what your computer runs on at home. Your Mac or your PC runs x86, and all game systems before did not. So they're like, oh, to be more powerful, we really need to move on to this new platform, but nothing else from the old days will run on it.
Except Microsoft figured out how to do it with
software.
Xbox One, software, but...
Because they're Microsoft, and they're literally, at this time, the most valuable company in the world, and they can just throw people at it. But yeah, Microsoft managed to make Xbox 360 emulation work.
I was very impressed with. Almost wanted to buy an Xbox One.
I almost did too, and then I looked at the 360 I already had,
and
I'm like,
I can just play it on 360. So.
I have a 360.
Mine still works. I got the S, so it's 2 years younger than the original one, so it works.
And then what's kind of cool, the weird implementation right now, but on the Switch, if you subscribe to the Switch Online system, you get an NES emulator that comes with a pile of games, and they're releasing more every month.
I feel like, have they released any since the upgraded Legend of Zelda, though?
They have, yeah.
It's giveaways?
Yeah, it's giveaways.
It's just a Nintendo emulator app on there. It came with 12, 16 games, and they added four more.
It came with 20, and then they added 4 more and 4 more. Like, I think the plan is every month they're going to add 3 or 4 more.
Those Nintendo folks.
Yeah.
I like where their brains are at.
It's neat in that it kind of brings that sort of idea of a Netflix of games sort of into reality.
Yeah, it's what we've all kind of been clamoring for.
Yeah.
Though your speedrunners will still be upset. But you're a speedrunner, stop it.
I mean, as far as I understand, they're pretty well emulated versions of the NES games.
Yeah, it's some of the best emulation I've seen on a Nintendo console of their own system.
But so far, they're still pretty early games in the life cycle of the NES.
Yeah, just put Balloon Fighter in there and
they
I'm
have
good.
Balloon Fight.
Balloon Fight? That's where I've been playing Metroid 1, actually. I was just, before this talking to you about Metroid 1, that's where I'm playing it.
I didn't know Metroid 1's in there. I need to play it properly for the first time.
Damn it!
I'm playing it and save scumming because that game really is made better with save scumming.
Wait, there's save states and things?
Yeah.
Did the save state come from emulators, by the way?
That's the first time I've ever seen it.
That's the first time I remembered. It was like, man, this game is so much better with F2 and F4.
So PC games would have quick save slots too. So maybe that might have been the way they got the idea for the emulators, to be like, oh, let's just save it here, but also because you're emulating it in software, they can just pause it wherever they want.
So fast and so instant, like you would just pop in and be, all right, I'm back where I was. Good.
And right back where it was, not just the level.
Yeah. So on top of...
Yeah, so we've talked about the illegal emulators. We talked about modding systems. We've talked about the legal.
And now we talk about the most recent, as of this filming, way to play retro games, the PlayStation Classic that Sony's releasing.
Which is kind of in the broader sense of retro repackagings for all the companies are doing right now.
And it sounds like it's garbage.
It sounds bad.
Is it?
Really bad.
Yeah, there were 12 games or 16 games that were released.
Final Fantasy VII's on it.
Final Fantasy VII is on it.
The only heavy hitter you would expect, though, that is on it.
Yeah, Symphony of the Night is not on it.
No Spyro.
No Spyro, because
No Crash Bandicoot.
A lot of
Wow.
games that they were working on re-releasing or working on porting, like
Makes
Crash
sense.
Bandicoot just released a package, Spyro just released a package.
There's no Wipeout. There's no.
There's Jumping Flash though, where you're a robot rabbit, you jump up and then this camera violently rotates down. And you have to land on platforms. And
So
forward.
it's Sony being Sony.
Yeah.
Yeah, a siphon filter is on the PAL version and not the American version, I believe.
Yeah, that's the other thing. Like a third of the games are PAL versions instead of American version, NTSC,
with the different refresh rate.
which means it runs at 50 frames per second instead of 60.
And
which
no one has a
means
TV
it's slow.
that supports
Yeah.
it.
Well, no, it'll run on the TV.
It just runs slowly.
It just runs slow. So it's worse.
Which is the worst implementation.
Yeah.
Why would they do that?
This company, this website, Digital
Even I
Foundry.
get that one as camera person. That's really bad.
I don't know if you know Digital Foundry, Terry, but they do a lot of like video comparisons of like video quality and video techniques in games. So they do side by sides for like different ports. Ocarina of Time, they did an in-depth study on the docked versus handheld frame rates and the texture qualities and
Yes.
resolutions, everything. So they found out that many of them were PAL versions.
Breath of the Wild.
Breath of the Wild, yeah. But they determined, at least preliminarily, that there's no hardware, software reason why they needed to include those.
Yeah.
They could have
Why
included
PAL?
the US versions or the Japanese versions, and it would have been fine.
Yeah. So it's very strange.
You know what's interesting though? You bring up PlayStation Classic. Obviously, that was a response to the massive success that was the NES Classic. Who saw that coming?
I mean, a lot of people kind of
Like, I
have
can't
been
believe-
hounding
Yeah.
them to do that.
didn't
But I
necessarily
can't
see it
believe
coming.
how much it was going to sell.
Yeah, because I was just like,
Neither did Nintendo.
yeah,
Yeah, they weren't ready.
yeah, because NES Classic was off to like crazy. It was like a Jingle All the Way style fiasco where people just running and snatching off shelves.
Yeah, that was.
It came up today, so that's the reason I had it.
Sinbad or Schwarzenegger?
That was Schwarzenegger.
No, it was both of them. No, they were both in
is
it.
it the both-
They were the one competing for the same
I
title.
just saw the cover, which has.
It's a great
Turbo
holiday movie.
time.
But yeah, so and so then yeah, that came out. The SNES Classic came out and also did gangbusters. The PSX Classic they decided to come out with to head off analog making something, and also to head off, I guess to just put something out so people would shut up asking where's the PSX.
See, if I'm Sony, I'm not doing that. I'm just
Yeah, like-
focusing on keep going further, better, stronger.
Especially because most of these games they've already ported to PS2 or PS3 on PlayStation Network. Some of them they've re-released on PlayStation Network for PS4, so they have the games in their digital pipeline. There was no reason for them.
It just felt like they
seemingly to
didn't.
just
Yeah,
follow.
they were probably caught between not wanting to take the wind out of the sails of their existing re-releases. So it's just stupid.
I also don't know. I mean, you're creating a sales strategy based on nostalgia works if you are a nostalgia-based company. Like Disney will always be able to sell you a Steamboat Willie frame.
Yeah.
Nintendo's always going to be able to make money on the original Super Mario Brothers. I don't know if the nostalgia for Sony PlayStation is in the same world.
I have not.
For the age that is spending the most money right now.
That's a great point. Because I know I'm not clamoring to play Battle Arena Toshinden ever again.
Yeah.
That's one of the games included in it. But I'm sure people who grew up with that as their first console maybe have really fond memories of it.
I'm sure they get the warm, tingly feelings when that Sony boot comes up with the dum dum. Yeah, like, they're like, oh my God, that feels like my childhood. Or at least they will in 10 years, you know?
Yeah, maybe. I think probably. I mean, I think I have the blinders on because I'm still Team Nintendo, even after all these years,
We
which is
discussed
ridiculous.
in a previous podcast, I think those games age worse, too. Like,
Yeah,
as part
that's,
of it.
that's a great point. First generation 3D.
Horrible.
Yeah, I mean, it's not enjoyable.
Like at the time, you couldn't make out Jumping Flash. Yeah. And it definitely must be super muddy and gross now. But.
Yeah, but I think what Sony has been doing, and I'd be interested to see the sales numbers on this, is their re-releases, how they're doing. Because, like, Final Fantasy VII, for example, is getting a remake, a reskin, and a new play style. And I'm betting that thing's going to sell like crazy.
On the PlayStation 5.
There was that.
When was that announced?
It's not been announced,
Oh,
but
you're just trolling.
I would
I-
put
I
money
got-
on that coming out on the PlayStation 5 and not the PlayStation 4.
Even still, I got a feeling if that one hits, then I would be like, okay, PlayStation, that's what you should be doing.
Right.
You should be taking the games that people do love and not re-releasing them in their original form, but revamping them, reconstructing them so we can play it again 15 years later in a new style, in a style that's more modern for today. Because I just don't think they have the same library that is begging to play more games. I think they were just too late into the trend of nostalgia-based content. It's kind of like, you know how like music today, like all of our artists are like, you're here for a year and you're gone. But then before, you know, if you go into like 95, 97 area, which is when Sony came out, some of those folks are still around.
Yeah.
I think it's that kind of idea. Like
Yeah,
there's
that's
musicians who
interesting.
started in 93 who are still around, who should not still be around.
Yeah, yeah.
And then there's these flash in the pans that we have now. I think just the mind of the culture now is
Faster.
different. Yeah.
I was just wondering earlier if Lana Del Rey is still alive.
Yeah. Who knows?
But yeah, everybody knows where Third Eye Blind is because it's put a new album last year.
Yeah.
You know, like.
And people are going. Hootie and the Blowfish just reformed. By
Oh,
the
wow.
way, and they're going on tour. Bare Naked Ladies are on the same tour. Were they ever that good? No, they were just at the right time. And that's kind of, I guess that's kind of my point.
Yeah. Well, what's interesting is I think there is this untapped vein that they're surprised about. Because they released, I remember they released the Crash Bandicoot trilogy recently.
Oh, yeah.
Remastered.
Do, like, crazy numbers?
So crazy!
Insane.
Like millions and millions and millions in all in every zone. Like they just sold like crazy. Like, oh my god, people really wanted to play money for these old games that
They
we
also,
remastered.
they also gave him didn't they also make him autistic?
What?
I'm pretty sure, no, in canon, he is autistic, I think, now.
I mean, all right.
Because he doesn't speak. He's just, just stuff like that.
Maybe, but I don't know if that.
I think they did.
Sales numbers that crazy.
We'll look into it. We'll look into it. But I think they did something.
I'll fact check it now.
They changed a lot of things. I mean, they basically remade those games like with modern graphics, and then people bought them like crazy, and they released it on everything. It's on the Switch now. See, it's funny to see the Sony mascot of 1995 on the Nintendo platform.
Well, I mean, Sonic games come out on.
But that was later, right? I mean, that
That's
was
true.
An older battle.
They went to
and
the
this is-
Olympics.
They went to the Olympics
and
together.
they
shook
resolved the
hands.
differences.
Yeah.
So, it's funny. I'm thinking. I think my favorite emulator ever is the Nintendo GameCube because it had the unbelievable Mega Man collection and Mega Man X collection. Those two, like my favorite games, they're up there. Were put on a single little cool little disc, and I could play it on the GameCube, and I destroyed every single one of those games. Like, I probably logged more time emulating with the GameCube than any other way of playing retro classic games.
Wow.
It's just interesting to think about. You know why else? Because they did the same thing with Sonic, was on the GameCube as well. That was the first Sonic Mega Collection. Go Mega Collections. Keep collecting.
Yeah, there's a lot of those coming out, and those are
Mario
good.
All-Stars was actually probably
Yeah,
the first
it was
one.
a big mega collection at the time. Yeah, the only other way to play retro games, really, other than all the things we already discussed, is to play the original games on the original hardware, which we haven't really touched on. It's an option.
Yeah, by going back in time.
Well, going back in time or going on eBay. And you can find an NES for a decent price still.
It's much cheaper than time travel.
Yeah, and you can find cartridges still. Some of them are rarer than others.
Yeah,
but
good luck with some of them.
yeah, but you can get Super Mario 1 for 50 cents, I'm sure, still. Give me a stack of them. And you can play it on an old TV, and it's awesome. Some games, and there's some systems that really need to be experienced on that original hardware. Right now, I am kind of formulating a hunt for a Vectrex system. Have you ever heard of that
You
one?
try to go back as far as possible, huh?
Yeah. So this was a system, it had its own
Was
screen.
that Mattel?
Is that before ColecoVision?
It was. It might have been concurrent at some point, but it had its own screen, and it was an oscilloscope for vector graphics.
Wow.
And you can't replicate that on any modern display. Like an oscilloscope looks like an oscilloscope. Like it's just not going to look the same.
Going 1982.
1982.
November.
The year I was born, the month before I was
Yeah,
born.
it's a month older than you.
Yeah, it's a month
Is that
older
why
than
you
me.
need it?
Well, I need it just because it's an experience you can't emulate elsewhere. And when you play, like, have you ever played Asteroids on an arcade cabinet, like the original?
Yes.
You know how bright and shiny that thing is?
That's true.
Nothing looks like that.
It was sold by Milton Bradley. I knew it was one of those toy companies.
Milton Bradley, yeah.
Those bastards.
But some stuff like that, like you need the original thing to play it, and they're still out there, and they're still relatively affordable. Like you can get a Vectors for like $100.
I bet Dragon's Lair would be a good cabinet to have.
Yeah, if you're okay with
that's a
repairing
laser
laser
disc.
discs.
Yeah.
Talk about bit rot. Oh my God, that must be heck. Yeah.
See, I'm on the other side of that.
Yeah.
I am enjoying the progress. I want everything. I don't even want it on an SD card. I want it on like sunglasses. Just put them on and I can play anything. Like I am fully embraced the digital world. I don't like having things anymore. Just the fact that you don't have to have things is awesome to me, and that you can have this amazing digital library in your pocket, as opposed to filling an entire room with NES cartridges or Vectrex and things like that. Like I fully embrace the idea of digitizing the world.
Well, I
so you
think
can access it through that.
that kind of brings up what might be a nice final topic for us here,
please.
is the psychology of, when you're playing these games. And I found, I don't know about you guys, but remember that first time we found a ZSNES emulator, you popped it in and you had every ROM you could play?
Yeah.
And how did you play those games? I know me personally, I'd be like, oh, this game's cool. Played for 5 minutes.
Yep.
Flip to
If
another
that
one.
long, yes.
Flip to another one, flip to another one.
And you were overwhelmed.
It's disposable and overwhelming. And the games aren't meant to be played like that. Like, you're not really playing the game. You're just dipping. And there's fun in that, but it's shallow, right?
How's your vinyl collection, by the way?
It's getting bigger. It's getting bigger, actually. It's real.
I just
He actually plays them sometimes.
Yeah.
I've witnessed this.
Yeah.
It's always the same 2 albums, so maybe you don't have any more than 2.
I got
but
like 50-ish. Yeah.
You only
not-
played 2.
Probably.
But
Wait,
those are there's the two kinds of people. There's the people who want the digital version, the people who say it's better. Okay, I admit I can see when the film looks better than the digital camera. I could see it, okay? But the convenience, man. I prefer a more convenient world, I think.
Certainly, but all right, so it's convenient, but how do you feel like if it's convenient but you don't even watch it? You don't even play
Yes, that's
like
wrong.
when you're overwhelmed, it feels wrong.
Yep, I'm with you.
And I feel that way even with some of the legal options. Like you download like the Nintendo right now, it's like have 30 Nintendo games. It's like boop, boop,
I
boop,
played
boop,
each of
boop.
them once, and then I played 3 of them a handful of times.
And I find like it's quick and dumb and shallow, and like I enjoy it, but then I'm done with it. But right now I'm trying to force myself to play my way through Metroid all the way through, and I'm liking it a lot more. Like as I'm playing these games through, I'm like, I understand this game better now, and I'm actually beating it, and this is
Because of the digital version?
well, the digital version makes it more convenient for sure. But then there's that mental, for lack of a better term, discipline
Sure.
to sit down and actually see it through. Because right now, the world at large is kind of going for quick release sort of, I don't know,
Well, it's the
quick
idea-
satisfaction.
It's also the idea of I want to watch Netflix while on my phone instead of devoting all of my time to one or the other. That is what I think most people want now. Give me something where I can do both. I don't want to shut off part of my brain and absorb all the attention on it. I
Bite-sized-
think it's wrong, but
Yeah.
I think that's what people want right now is like, let me do this.
Yeah, bite-sized, fluffy garbage. Yeah, and it's junk food, like mental junk
It's gonna
food
be my
you're
other
doing all the
tattoo
time.
right here. Bite-sized fluffy car. But I will say a quick question before we wrap up is my feeling on this changed dramatically probably 6 years ago, 6, 7, 8 years ago when I purged everything. And I no longer had a system. I had no video games for the first time in my entire life.
Yeah.
And I remember going, and I went to the GameStop, and they gave me like $500 back. And the look on this dude's face as I was turning in these games, like it was like I shot his mom. Because he's looking at like Resident Evil for GameCube, and he's like, oh my God, this is like a $27 game. You give it back, are you sure? And I'm like, yeah, just, yeah. And I couldn't even get rid of all of it. There were games that they wouldn't accept.
Yeah.
So then I had to, I couldn't do it. I hired someone to eBay away my NES and SNES collection. And when it was done, the baggage was gone.
Yeah, like you're like,
It was like, that was really hard to do.
Yeah.
But now I have nothing tethering me to gaming anymore until you guys brought me back. Of course. But you brought me back in a time that was
where it's all more
conducive to what I
convenient.
wanted.
Yeah. And it's more like how you would love to, like you said, you like people to carry it around in your pocket, have access to it whenever you like. And getting rid of that kind of helped you with that because...
But the fact is, I took 5 generations of consoles with me from home to college to my first apartment to anywhere I was working in the country, there was a giant, like the size of this cooler filled with stuff that was traveling with me for a long time, and now that's not there anymore. But it's been replaced with camera equipment, so I didn't nothing changed. But I distinctly remember the guy I was before I did that. And if you've never gotten rid of something, I don't think you'll be able to experience the joy I have. And I think because I did that, I can't experience the joy that you guys have. And I think that's just the decision is, who do you want to be? Both can be right.
Yeah. I mean,
Although if you ask one of these guys, their way's the only
No,
way.
it's a personal decision.
Yeah, and I was gonna say, like, in saying of their way, like, Chris is more of a full collector than I am.
Yeah.
Because I actually just found yesterday in my garage is where I put all of my Dreamcast discs. I was wondering where they were. I figured I just sold them or threw them out.
Oh, I saw the picture.
And then, and I pulled out, I was like, oh, here's my Skies of Arcadia, here's my Soul Calibur.
Your favorite games,
Yeah.
some of them of all time.
I still have my Dreamcast,
But
but I only
not
had 2 games
Fantasy.
with it, and the rest of them were in the garage. So I was like, wait,
But not Panzer Dragoon.
It was for Saturn. I never had a
Yeah,
Saturn.
never had a Saturn.
Our friend Al had a Saturn, and I got to play it once, and Chris got to play it once, and it was glorious. I think he still has both of them.
He better. But yeah,
Much
you
as
so
work.
how'd you
But
feel when you
yeah,
found
so
those?
I found them, and I was like, yeah, I have these. I don't want to boot up my Dreamcast and play them because I want a new I want Skies of Arcadia on Switch.
Right.
I want a Dreamcast classic release of Skies of Arcadia on Switch.
Yeah.
I want Sonic Adventure 2 Battle Dreamcast GameCube Classic on Switch. I want them to keep carrying these games forward with me, digital or otherwise, so I can have access to a newer, more future-proof version of it. So it's great to have it as like, oh, I'm looking at this disc, it's great, but I'm also thinking, discs die and degrade. I should try to sell these on eBay before they're gone.
I hope that there's a museum that's being built somewhere where everything is being preserved in the most pristine condition for all of this stuff. Because
There is.
There's one in LA that I know of.
Good.
Keep going.
Does it have all of them?
I think,
It has a lot.
It's just about everything.
So you're saying we could be like young Indiana Jones being like, it belongs in a museum.
Yes!
Yeah, they're taking things from people. It's like, why is there chewing gum on Mega Man X3?
It's called 8-Bit something. They do a lot of like releases of like art prints, and they do like art installations based on video games. But they also have like a museum of.
I think
classics.
it's like the ACA. It's just like the.
Smithsonian has a bunch of video game stuff, I believe. Nowadays.
Ancient Egyptian video games.
MoMA has a whole video game art district, but there is a specific video game historical museum that tries to collect everything.
Then all is right in my world, and I hope all is right in your world. Thank you so much for joining us for another episode of Tubby Talk. Let us know what kind of classic games you're still hanging on to. Let us know if you're a perjurer or if you still have all of the classics. We'd love to know. We do this for you, and we want to keep talking to you about classic games because that's what we love and that's what we do. Oh, and don't forget, the best place to play retro games is here at Tubby Robot with these two guys. Thank you guys so much. We'll see you next time on Tubby Talk.
Bye-bye.
Peace.